Welcome to this second lecture about the future of liberalism. Today I'm joined by Professor Helena Rosenblatt of the City University of New York. She's the author of The Lost History of Liberalism, which I spoke about in the previous lecture in this series, and I'll hold the book up just to advertise it a little bit. Welcome, Helena.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to talk about my book and about liberalism in general. So you asked me to introduce myself briefly, and I teach at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. So I teach mainly graduate students, master's and PhD students. I'm a historian, but I'm also in the Department of Political Theory and French. And I'm Swedish. My origins are Swedish. I went to Columbia University for both my undergraduate and my graduate work. And my dissertation was on Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And that came out as a book. And then the following book was on Benjamin Constant, a little less well-known figure. We might talk about him. But now often, compared with Tocqueville and often included in the canon of liberal thinkers. Then I wrote a book, the book that you just showed to our audience. And now I'm working on an intellectual biography of Madame de Staël. Who will also talk about, I think, in this program. So that's me.
Wonderful. So a companion volume to the book about Benjamin Constant.
In a way, but I'm also going to pick up on what I say in the Lost History of Liberalism, which has thinking about liberalism that way has I think enriched my understanding of liberalism. And so I think I'm going to use everything I learned in that book to provide a context for understanding Madame de Staël.
That's great. What is it about Swiss thinkers, Helena?
You know
Rousseau
what?
and Constant and Madame de Staël. What is it about the Swiss?
Well, may I answer that question? It's kind of a funny thing, but I actually lived in Switzerland for a very long time and not that far from Geneva. And so that explains the Rousseau. And then I like to say that, because I write in my first book on Rousseau very much about how the Genevan context helps us understand his political thought mainly. But where I lived, it was a 2-hour drive to Geneva, and the second book was on Benjamin Constant, was from Lausanne, which was 1 hour away from me. No, I'm joking a little bit, but when you have two little kids and you've got to drive 2 hours to the archives, that was a challenge. Madame de
There's
Staël was
something.
a logical
Yeah.
development. And The Lost History of Liberalism, I was actually approached by by a wonderful editor at Princeton University Press, who asked me, do you want to write a history of liberalism? There hadn't been something treating the whole subject. Now there are, because of the crisis of liberalism we're living through. But at that time, when I started thinking about it, there really wasn't anything that was a survey of the history of liberalism. So I started to think about it, and this is what came out of it.
Well, I think many of the other books about liberalism, they focus on liberalism as a sort of unnamed force, also in sort of 17th century life. Whereas your focus is very much okay. So what did people have in mind when they used the word liberalis or liberality or liberalism? That's I guess that's your contribution, isn't
That's
it?
right, and I started out in that book when this editor asked me to write the book, or invited me to write the book. I started thinking. I mean, I went right into sort of thinking I was going to do a chapter each on the great thinkers of the liberal tradition. I love reading, what we call the great thinkers, despite the fact that many of them are dead white men. I really enjoyed that. So I went off and I started really studying in context again, John Locke, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, so on and so forth. And suddenly I just stopped myself because I suddenly said, like, hey, who decided these were part of the liberal tradition?
Hmm.
John Locke obviously didn't know about any such thing.
Yes.
The word liberalism didn't exist. And we know that canons are created after the fact
Yes.
and often for political reasons. And how
Yes.
we read these thinkers depends very much on our own context.
Yes.
So I stopped, and I had a great friend, Mel Richter, at the Graduate Center and at Hunter College, where I was also teaching, who kept whispering in my ear, conceptual history,
Hmm.
Begriffsgeschichte. And he kind of nudged me into this approach, although mine is a little different. I mean, would you believe it? There are several different ways of doing conceptual history as well.
Hmm.
And I did what what you just said, which was really to focus on the words
Yeah.
liberality, and liberalism. When did the word liberalism, when was it coined? What did people mean about it? And how about 50 years later, 100 years later, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So that, and yeah, and see how liberalism developed over time to where we are today.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, if we begin with your sort of method as a historian, then, because when I was reading your book for the first time and for the second time, I was struck by the fact that you operate very much as a historian in this book. This is historiography produced by a historian, but I kept on sort of thinking to myself that you're sort of politically drawn to some of the ideas that you discuss in the book, perhaps even drawn to this kind of liberalism which has been somewhat forgotten. And so I think it's interesting to begin with a little reflection upon your process there. Were you expecting readers to sit there guessing which of the ideas you actually quite like? Because we do have to guess.
No, well, that's good. That's good. As a historian, one tries to um, have a bit of neutrality when you approach a subject. But if you sense that I was sympathetic to the people I discuss, the liberals that I discuss, I generally was sympathetic, and I became more so the more I studied them, and yeah, I felt like over time I actually became more sympathetic, except towards the end of my book, where I discuss where I think maybe liberalism took a wrong turn.
Mm,
And I
yes.
still sympathized with her. It's, I think, a kind of a natural thing that happens when you study people in context. You start to understand the problems they were addressing and the meaning, what they meant by what they said. And yeah, I just came to realize the problems that these liberal thinkers were up against, and how they navigated that, and the kind of answers that they came up with, not all of which were ones we would agree with today, and some are controversial, and some are not very attractive at all. So it's
Mm,
not like I worship these thinkers, but generally, yes, I think they're reformers. They are concerned about creating a good society. And yeah, and they were up against tremendous odds. I think they were also quite pragmatic, most of them.
hmm.
So they were interested in solving problems. And as these
Yes.
problems changed over time,
Hmm.
they adjusted, and that also accounts for some of the, or all of the evolution and the
Yeah.
reimagining of liberalism that's happened over the centuries.
Yeah. Because um, another historian of intellectual history might be drawn to the emergence of the Republican thought, for example. Another book I like a great deal begins in ancient Rome with Republican thought and proceeds to the Renaissance and then the English Civil War, and so. But you're much more interested in liberalism than, say, republicanism.
Yes, and I really think that maybe the distinction between the two has been overdrawn. So, what do we need by republicanism? Often, what it means is, commitment to virtue,
Yeah.
and an abhorrence of self-interest, values of citizenship,
Mixed
and
government, perhaps. Yeah.
sorry, sorry,
Mixed government.
mixed
Yeah.
government. But these things are concerns that liberals had as well.
Yes.
And it's not like liberals were against virtue. On the contrary,
You make
on the
that very
con
clear in the
they
book.
make
Yeah.
that. I hope so. I hope I make
Yeah.
that clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so let's, I'm going to actually sort of vault over the ancient Rome part of your argument, even though it is absolutely fascinating. And I love the idea of, the liberal arts as the institutions providing the leaders of the future and all the rest of it. These are really fascinating ideas. But we don't have all the time in the world, so I thought we might sort of turn to two of the main protagonists of this particular history, the Swiss people that we've referenced earlier on, who were actually a couple, it emerges. And let's talk a little bit about Benjamin Constant and Madame de Stael. And before I sort of invite you to say one or two things about them, I'll just say it's quite clear that it's impossible to sum up Benjamin Constant's contribution to liberalism in this period, because he just contributed so much. And in your book, you get into all the details, what exactly he contributed in these different periods. Obviously, it was a time of change in France, and somehow he managed to be a public figure during virtually all of these times after the terror, whether it was before the Restoration or afterwards. So there's too much to sum up, of course. But what are the highlights of for you of Benjamin Constant's contribution to liberal thought, and what about Madame de Stael?
Okay, well, let me start with Madame de Stael, because she's really somebody I want to highlight now, and include, if we're going to create a canon, include her in the canon of great thinkers and actors. So Madame de Stael was the daughter of Jacques Necker and Suzanne Curchod. Jacques Necker himself, both of whom were pretty much self-made people and came from Switzerland, from Geneva and Lausanne. And Jacques Necker was a very important banker. And he came to Paris as a teenager and just did fantastically well, and actually became finance minister to the king. Madame Necker ran a powerful salon dedicated to her husband's career. So Madame de Stael, their daughter, who married a Swede, and that's where the de Stael comes from. She was obviously a child prodigy, incredibly well educated by her mother, who took charge her personally of her education, and she was made to participate in her mother's salon. We can go into what a salon means. Maybe your listener know already, but at 12 years old, that's where she developed her interest in politics, in philosophy, and literature, and all the things. And she became a great conversationalist and a powerhouse of her own, like her mother, perhaps even more so than her mother. And so when she got married, that made it possible for her to open her own salon. She got diplomatic immunity because her husband was ambassador, and he was very supportive of her too, which is worth saying. And she basically, and I found this in contemporaries at the time, her enemies and her admirers, that it was in her house, in her salon, in her drawing room, that liberalism came together. Now, and this is and she grew up, imagine, in the Enlightenment during then she lived through the French Revolution and then Napoleon. So it's an incredibly interesting context as well. And it was Madame de Stael who discovered Benjamin Constant and brought him to Paris. And with her network, as you can imagine, one of the richest women in Europe, and the daughter of the finance minister, she and who ran this very powerful salon, she gave him the connections he needed to make it in the world. and even co-wrote pieces with him, uh, co-wrote speeches. As you know, at the time, a woman really couldn't become a politician herself. She couldn't stand for election,
Yes.
and she even kind of had to hide her political ambitions or political writings. So she often acted through the men. I think this is way how women, exerted influence at the time, for better and for worse. Often they were called meddlers. Madame de
Yeah.
Stael was called meddlers, all the time a meddler. But everybody recognized her incredible power.
Yeah.
And so together they formed a formidable partnership. Now,
Yeah.
what I tried to show also about Madame de Stael and Benjamin Constant is that these liberal, I want to show also their actual political actions, see them as politicians. And so, in some ways, Madame de Stael is not an original thinker, but she's an original person,
Mm-hmm.
and she's incredibly important as this sort of support and influencer. And then what is very novel and funny, I use that word, and original about her is how she used her best-selling novels to
Yes.
promote liberal ideas, and she used literary criticism and to convey these ideas in a way that would influence the public. And she was very conscious of that. And so was Napoleon, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
who exiled her, censored her, hated her, was grumbling about her in St. Helena, on St. Helena, where she was saying, I hate that woman and her salon. And I obviously can talk way more about Madame de Stael and the kind of powerful critic she was of Napoleon, one of the first and one of the strongest, most fierce and courageous, who was actually very important in bringing together the Sixth Coalition that defeated him at Leipzig, Battle of
Oh, how
Leipzig.
interesting. How interesting. But how did she communicate her criticisms of Napoleon then? Is this in publications or?
Oh yeah, and there you can see it in her novels.
Mm.
Delphine, he is negotiating the Concordat with the Catholic Pope, and so she speaks very well of Protestantism.
Yes.
She in her second. I mean, there's more, but in the second, these are best-selling novels.
Yes.
And the second one on Corinne, he's just invaded. He's just taken over Italy. He's confiscating art. He's looting and bringing it to France. And so she writes about the beautiful statues and architecture and culture of Italy. She
Yes.
publishes on Germany, which is very celebrated, perhaps her most influential text. She publishes this, lauding their beautiful cultural traditions, their courage, just as he's marching all over Germany.
Okay.
So these are the kinds of things she's saying, and if you know the deep context of the time, you see these things. Um, and feminist historians have taught us a lot about Madame de Stael, and they've tended to be literary historians. So if they read her a certain way, very valuable. But I'm really interested in her politics, so that's what I want to highlight and focus on in this
Yes.
intellectual, and her battle with Napoleon, because I think liberalism came together very much as a reaction to the terror of the French Revolution, and then to Napoleon and what he did to all the things they'd been fighting, the liberals had been fighting for throughout the revolution.
Yes. How
And as
interesting.
I think I said earlier, that the word was actually coined, liberalism, in 1812. And so that is also the timing is precisely Napoleon.
Liberalism, yes.
Yeah.
But in your book, you actually tell us that she uses the word liberal about the 1791 Constitution. In actual fact, she praised the deputies for having given France the liberal institutions necessary to ensure civil liberty. So it's as though her pronouncement was of some importance at that time.
Absolutely. And today, even when we teach the French Revolution or in sort of Western histories, the surveys, when you get to the French Revolution, it's often divided into the liberal period, which is the early period, and then the radicalization, the terror, and then
Yeah,
the kind of wind down. So of course, we have historians, modern historians, have labeled this the liberal period, which is interesting, I find as well.
indeed. And where do you begin with Benjamin Constant? I mean, do you turn to some of the writings that he produced after Napoleon returned from Elba in 1815? Do you turn to the principles of politics applicable to all governments, or to his, to the part he played in the constitutional document, additional act to the constitutions of the empire? I mean, where do you begin with Constant
Well,
and his contribution? Yeah.
I actually begin earlier. So Madame de Stael brought him to Paris in 1795 during the Directory, and he wrote some important articles then, very interesting ones. He promotes, the liberal package, the family of concepts. So it's rule of law, civil equality, representative government, with the safeguarding of some important individual rights, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom to dispose freely of property, private property. So he's
Yes.
already advocating these things in 1795, and he goes on to fight for this through Napoleon's rule. First, he becomes, the liberals are actually quite pleased with Napoleon in the very beginning, or
Yes.
pleased, they're hopeful, because they feel that there's chaos in France, basically. There's
Yes.
a civil war going on, there's foreign wars, there's great polarization between the left and the right, and they feel that they need a charismatic figure. France has been ruled by a monarch for hundreds of years, and they start to think that we need a strong man to
Hmm.
save the revolution, and he poses as one, and super charismatic. He's fantastic at propaganda,
Yeah.
right? And he's conquered Italy, and he himself writes his own military bulletins and propagates this image of himself as a defender of the revolution and a great guy. He comes to Paris and he makes all the right noises. He dresses in civilian clothes. He goes and he speaks with all the power brokers. And so both Benjamin Constant and Madame de Stael, we're talking about Constant right now. He actually, with Madame de Stael's help, becomes a member of the Tribunat,
Yes.
but it very quickly bugs in a big way Napoleon,
Yeah.
again with the help of Madame de Stael.
Yes.
And so they become this formidable partnership, but they become also his enemies
Yes.
around when they see his despotic tendencies.
Yes.
And then during the Restoration, Constant actually becomes a great. He's elected to the Chamber of Deputies. He
Yes.
becomes considered a leader of the Liberal Party. He writes. I should have said earlier. You're absolutely right. He wrote a constitution for Napoleon around that time, where he again stands for these principles I just spoke about, which
Yeah.
are again in question. And yeah, towards the end of his life, he is this great deputy. He's well known for his fabulous speeches on the floor of the assembly, and is very popular with the young. And when he passes away in 1830, he's actually given a state funeral,
Oh,
and
really?
people line the streets because he's considered a champion of liberal principles. Madame de
Yes.
Stael died in 1817, earlier, quite a bit earlier. So she wasn't part of that. She died during the Restoration, but she wasn't around to see this. And they had broken their friendship,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Fascinating. So there really are this sort of late 18th century, early 19th century power couple. and they make a massive impact. And it's as though you think they should be household names, really, especially in France, I would have thought. Uh,
Yeah.
but also internationally, because rather than it being the philosophy of Locke, you really want to sort of associate liberalism with the two of them.
Absolutely. And we're told this story, which is that liberalism is this Anglo-Saxon tradition. Some people go back to the Magna Carta, and then hundreds of years later you get Locke, and then these wonderful ideas came to America. They're enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and in the American Constitution, and then America becomes the great defender and promoter of liberalism around the world. So it's this story of an Anglo-American tradition that we have learned about and is still kind of propagated and disseminated. Whereas if you really do what I did in my book, and you look at the word and the concept and what they themselves were saying about liberalism, what liberals were called by their enemies and their defenders, how they described it, you'll see that France played a tremendous role, especially in the beginning, as I've kind of tried to describe, and then it gets reimagined, reconceptualized over time, and actually Germany plays a big role, which will surprise people because the French and the Germans were really written out of the canon, if you will, for 20th century reasons, for the wars,
Yes.
and America became what it has become since, in terms of reputation, in terms of its relationship to liberalism.
Yes.
If you look at the dictionaries and the encyclopedias, you will see that for a very long time, through the 19th century, liberal as a political word and
Yeah.
liberalism is associated with France, with French
Yes.
Revolution. So it's in
Yes.
many ways, in the beginning, considered kind of dangerous
Hmm.
and foreign. So the word liberal, when it refers to something political, is often written in italics
Yes.
or with an accent on the E.
Exactly.
Um, yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So we're going to speed through the 19th century in just a moment. And I guess that one of the things that fascinates me about your book is the fact that, let's say liberalism was very much an incomplete project in the age of Constant and Madame de Stael. But important liberals made highly significant contributions to liberal thought over the course of the 19th century. And I think you get into that. And I want to discuss that with you. But in a sense, when we do that, we're going to be speaking very much about the positive legacy. And I thought we should perhaps preface the very positive legacy with just a little word about sort of the failures and the shortcomings and the moral lapses of 19th century liberals, just so that we don't give the impression that they got it right every time, as it were.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're not perfect in any stretch of the imagination, and there are things that, from our perspective today, we find absolutely abhorrent. One of I mean, sexism is one thing, if not a certain amount. We might even call it misogyny today, although I think that's a very strong word and very unfair in many cases. But they did not, for a very long time, advocate the vote for women. Neither Madame de Stael nor Constant did. I think they would have been laughed out of the assembly if a liberal suggested that in 18th century France.
Yes.
It comes very late, as we know, in England and the rest of the world,
Even
actually.
later in Switzerland.
Oh, very late in Switzerland. I think 1971 or something.
Yes.
And my mother tells me that in Sweden, she wasn't able to open a bank account until, pretty late without her husband's signature.
Gosh.
So, so this was a failure. I would like to add immediately that they weren't the only ones. When we talk about liberalism, like what was liberal about liberalism, as opposed to conservatism or counter-revolutionaries, they were not alone in thinking this, and they had some very interesting ideas about women. Even in Locke, you'll find some very interesting progressive for their time ideas. Now, so that's sexism. Racism is another one.
Yeah.
Although they were pioneers in a way of anti-slavery, but they were still, you can, be against the slave trade and slavery and still be very prejudiced. And many of them were. Again, so was the other side. Right.
Yes.
So looking at context, do we want to say liberalism is sexist? So let's get rid of it. So it's a bad tradition. Liberalism was racist, so we can't admire it. It causes problems for sure. I mean, yeah, there's some bad stuff for sure. Then eugenics. I think I talk about eugenics in the 19th century. I mean, Wilson, I believe, I have to check in my book, but I think Wilson was responsible or a promoter of vaccinating, or people deemed unfit, so they couldn't have children. I might be
Yes.
getting that wrong. I
Chemical
discussed it in my book.
sterilization.
Sterilization, that's what it is. That's
Yes.
right, not vaccination, sterilization.
Yeah.
And, the unfit was very broadly, confusingly defined. So that's a horrible a moment for colonialism, imperialism.
Yes.
At the same time, I don't want to say that liberals were all of one mind, right? That's another
That's right.
point in my book. There was arguments within them, debates within the Liberal Party and the liberals in general.
Yes.
So, and this could be a strength and sometimes, a weakness because of this. These sometimes not even really sure what they stand for, except for they're not for the other side. So
Yeah.
this doesn't help in key moments, and we're seeing that today as well, aren't we?
Indeed. Indeed. So, having conceded that liberals made lots of mistakes and that they were human, or and so on, perhaps we could sort of turn to some of the things that we could perhaps even celebrate, if we, in the course of the 19th century. I mean, if I could just sum up the focuses of some of your important chapters. If I could just sum that up. So, so your history is punctuated by a series of important liberal developments. 1848, we have liberals advocating for an improvement in the moral character of the people. Then liberals arrive at the conclusion that good leadership was a prerequisite of a kind of liberal demos, and that takes you on to figures like Gladstone and so on, Napoleon III. Then liberals defend the idea of a liberal education system, and you get into that. That's very much with a French focus again. And then some liberals, you begin with German liberals, they develop an interest in socialist ideas, or at least justified and useful government intervention. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, and that's just my little sort of summary of what I see as the sort of positive developments, really sort of in the second half of the 19th century. But I don't know if we've really got time to go through all of these, but maybe perhaps you could just pick up on one or two of these very important developments in liberal thought, which you discuss in your book.
Absolutely, and that's a kind of a guiding thread through the book. Is one of the threads is that liberal. Let's start with liberal arts, for example. The liberal arts are for forming the character of a young boys of an elite. The liberals are very much elitist for quite some time, but they expected a lot from the elite as well.
Yes.
They were supposed to exercise the qualities of a citizen, that is generosity, not be selfish. And you hear this throughout the history until fairly recently, that when they were for individual rights, it was really so that people could better perform their duties, that they could, that they would be released from the pressures of the church or of the hierarchical system that kept them down, kept them from developing their character. This is, of course, when I say that about the church, I mean the Catholic Church, but and a predominant number of liberals were, relative to their numbers, were liberals. For a long time, the Catholic Church was very anti-liberal, but they were in many sense moral thinkers, and this carries them through the history. So you were talking about education, about character, and even about early socialist ideas that they believed at a certain point when they were seeing, so they react to the problems of the time. I think I said that before, and stand for what they regard are the most important liberating principles each step of the way. So when you have industrialization and the obvious what they refer to as pauperization in the cities. You have somebody like T.H. Green, a great liberal moral philosopher, and others who are influenced by him, saying that we need to give everyone the opportunity to become moral individuals. They did have a bit of a condescending, if not disdainful and fearful attitude to the poor, but we had to raise them up before they could be given the vote, before they could flourish as individuals. And this was this happened. This developed over the course of the centuries. So you mentioned Germany, very important in this Bildung, the concept of Bildung, the concept that government needs to step in, not just to spread wealth, but to enable this character formation, this building of citizenship qualities.
Yes. You make the comparison between the physical health of the German or the Prussian soldiers and the French soldiers. And it was obviously to do with government intervention back in Prussia, which was very interesting. So, yes, I mean, that's it's a fascinating story that you tell about how a number of building blocks sort of get put in place, and sort of liberalism becomes kind of manifold in time, because if you add government intervention to a sense that the moral education of people is important, then something sort of something multidimensional is coming into to existence. Are there any aspects of this 19th century liberalism which are less useful to us because they're excessively bound up with the time and place of their origin?
Yeah, some of the drawbacks that you mentioned, the racism, the sexism, and so on and forth, are things we've obviously hopefully mostly moved away from. I wanted to say also, I think it's an important point to make about, we mentioned socialism and government intervention, but I also describe in my book how in the course of the 19th century, liberalism sort of bifurcated into two liberalisms. The liberalism of extreme laissez-faire, what we would today in America at least call libertarianism, and the liberalism of state intervention and more regulation. So this is how you get today that liberalism in America, at least colloquially, means in government intervention, regulation, and so forth, big government, if you will. Whereas in most of the rest of the world, it's a bit right of center, right? It's more for
Like in
market, free
Denmark, for
markets, and
example.
so on and so forth. And on the question again on character and so on, is that, and I said that elites, yes, they were elitist, but they required a lot they asked a lot from their leaders, and especially then their leaders. So, Lincoln becomes a big, a wonderful figure that convinced also the rest of the world that liberal democracy was viable, because he held the country together during the Civil War. Gladstone, these are characters who appeal to an appeal to the better nature. What is the expression?
To
Better
the
angels
better
of their
angels. Yeah.
nature. And I should say also, one of the things I really appreciate about the liberals is this idea that human nature is not necessarily selfish and sinful and so on, but that we have within ourselves the capacity to improve ourselves and improve the world. And this is something that I think guides them throughout their history, and could hopefully come back again. So I can't remember what your question was, but how
Yeah.
I think that because they focused on certain things in the context of their times, as the times change and the problems change, the new problems, become more front and center, if you will, and the others
Yes.
recede a little bit in the background. Once they've achieved representative constitutional government, although
Yes.
that's of course in danger today, then they move on to other issues. The
Yes.
economic issues become more important to them.
Yes.
And later on in America during the Cold War and so on, and during the wars, it becomes totalitarianism is something very, very important to combat. And so each time liberalism is shaped by these
Yes.
problems that they're confronting.
Yes. But I mean, if we were to refashion liberalism today, I mean, I guess we are in the business of refashioning liberalism today, and so would you argue that liberals today might justifiably be concerned with the improvement in the moral character of people?
For sure. And I don't want to suggest that liberals are bad people or that they're not concerned about morals. It's just the way, and I'll say I consider myself a liberal. So our maybe our image could be how we present ourselves to the public, the way we frame our discussions, our platforms, what we stand for. So I really think that, for example, liberal arts, the view of liberal arts as something character forming, something that helps form citizenship qualities, that should be promoted and cherished. Public schools, I believe, are extremely important. I am a big believer in great books. Surprise, surprise. The tradition of teaching, Columbia University has this great course they call it Contemporary Civilization, but that's a little bit of a misnomer, but where they read great books. And of course, what constitutes a great book will change over time as we appreciate
Yes.
other cultures and perspectives. But I think that's very important. I think that the language can change, less focus on entitlements and individual rights and making so many choices available. I don't think that's a bad thing, but how about some moral obligations?
Hmm.
I don't think that liberals should be frightened to talk about such things. And there is that in the liberal tradition. So I know some people, the post-liberals, for example, are saying that we need a new kind of we need to walk away from liberalism or invent something new because it's tainted, it's over, and so forth. And I'm trying to say that no, the ideas are there. They're
Yes.
just lost a little bit. We need to rediscover them. And then if I may say, I don't know if I'm going on too long,
No.
but is also that we are now facing new serious problems that many people are not thinking about enough, and that is AI
Yes.
and automation of factories. This is going to throw millions of people out of their jobs.
Yes.
And a lot of our legislators don't seem to really grasp this or understand this. There has to be in my opinion, new regulations, thinking through what this is doing to our economy,
Yes.
and reinvent, reimagine, reconceptualize liberalism to effectively confront these challenges, while not, forgetting about this kernel of this central notion in liberalism that's been there from the very beginning and goes even back further before there was liberalism, of generosity, of toleration, of moral development,
Yes.
of character formation, which we so desperately need today.
Absolutely. And of course, I think we are a bit shy with the term virtue today, but I'm sure that should be a key component in every liberal vocabulary. It's a very important idea, and it's essential to Republican thought, as we suggested earlier.
Absolutely.
So that's all fascinating. I want to move on to a couple of considerations about your version of liberalism as a living tradition, if it is at all a living tradition. Um, in my mini lecture, I was trying to make some kind of connection between your thinking and then the thinking of a scholar like Adrian Pabst and a journalist like Peter Franklin. Um, I think I said that Adrian Pabst was British. He's actually German. So again, liberalism and Germany. He has a position at an English university, but I'm pretty sure he's German. Um, we've got journalists, we have scholars, we have politicians. I mean, have you detected any? I would just say I think also that one if I can guess why you're so interested in this other version of liberalism, it's potentially quite a sort of cross-party political credo. That I think there are elements in the liberalism as you define it that draw in people from the centre left, and then there are other elements which draw in people from the centre right. I would have thought, and so it's potentially a kind of cross-party kind of ideological approach. Um, and do you find yourself reading any scholars or listening to politicians and thinking, well, maybe they're a little bit in the tradition that I'm outlining in my book?
Yes, yes. I would like to start by saying that liberals from the very beginning were centrists, right? So,
Mm,
and somebody like Madame de Stael brought into her salon people from the right, people from the left, and really is not extremists, not polarizing forces, but trying to build trust, trying to build some sort of agreement in the center. And this should be, I think, what we're aiming for at this during this crisis of liberalism. And you're right, there are aspects that we share, on the center left and the center right today. Now, the so-called post-liberals, they come in different. They're different as well, right? Because
mm,
we have the kind of extremists of, like, I would call Patrick Deneen quite extreme, especially his second book,
mhm.
and saying that, liberalism failed because it succeeded, suggesting that we need something different. I think you've heard me say today, and I believe firmly that we don't need something different. I think we need to reimagine it. I think we need maybe to reconceptualize it a little bit.
Mm.
I wrote a review of his book, and it was a dual review, which was super interesting because I reviewed his book together with Deirdre McCloskey, who's a
Mhm.
prominent libertarian and true believer in what we now call classical liberalism, that is libertarianism, the strong advocate of free markets and
Yes.
deregulation. So one says liberalism is this fabulous thing, but we should go back to the kind of laissez-faire
Mm.
Smithian version. And they will say that the modern liberalism, especially in American version, is a distortion of the liberal tradition. Whereas then you have the Deneen's who say that it's everything that's wrong with the world is due to liberalism, and that we need to trash it and find something else.
Yes.
And it's, by the way, it sounds many of these. post-liberals are actually Catholic, and many of their arguments are modern repetitions of what those 19th century Catholics or advocate. Not all Catholics have been anti-liberal. I want to make that clear.
Yes.
Of course not. Some very important Catholics were liberals, but the popes until the mid 20th century were very staunch anti-liberals. Now, Pabst, you mentioned, I agree with a lot of what he says.
Hmm.
I think it makes a lot of sense, especially his kind of moral conclusions of what we need to focus on, trust building, uh, speak more about dignity, toleration. We need to communicate with each other, left and right. We
Yes.
have to lower the tone or the polarization. And
Yes.
this is also an awful thing that's happened, and of course has been amplified by the internet. This terrible polarization where you're demonizing the other side.
Yes.
I think that's anti-liberal, really,
Yes.
to do that, and it's really a shame. Now, some of the I'm asked, like, how do you do that? How do you change? How do you make people start talking about dignity and virtue and all of this?
Mm-mm. Yes.
Well, maybe we should call on our leaders, on our
Yes.
political leaders, to be more elitist in the old-fashioned way. In other words,
Yes.
show by example, show
Yes.
by your own language. And some are trying to uplift the conversation
Yes.
and really inspire people. Again, that's hard with our system. Like, how do we give rise to those sorts of leaders in the so I'm generally an optimist, but
Yeah.
there are some serious complications and hurdles along the way.
Yes.
But I do like Pabst. I love to talk to him.
Yeah. Almost like a little resurfacing of that old tradition. Um, but I wanted to also ask you if you recall who Connor Lamb and Abigail Spanberger are.
I
And
do not. Tell me.
no, well, they are they're centrist Democrats, and I asked you if you remember because their sort of heyday was well I mean Spanberger might be become something of a star quite soon, but they had this moment in 2018 when they won. They had a lot of success in the midterms because they won in. There were Democrats who won in Republican-leaning congressional districts. So Lamb in Pennsylvania, Spanberger in Virginia's 7th congressional district. And they're just, there were these centrist Democrats who won, as I say, in Republican-leaning districts. And there was quite a lot of excitement at the time about this, and it seemed their argument, of course, was that the Dems win in the centre rather than out to the left. So it just strikes me as they strike me as an interesting couple, and the Abigail Spanberger. Well, she is in the she left office to run for the Virginia governor. That election is on November the 4th of this year. She'd become the first woman to serve as governor of Virginia, so it's something to watch.
Yes.
But I just think that they are these kind of somewhat blue or conservative Dems, and I think we're always looking for these paradoxical figures to embody some of these ideas that you speak about in your book.
Absolutely. Now that I didn't remember them is a reflection of my being a historian and being really immersed, trying to make progress on my book on Madame de Stael. So I'm really living in the 19th century right now, but
Yes.
no excuses. I think that that sounds like to me a very good idea. We certainly have to find a way to appeal to and explain one's position in a way that that again, that really speaks to people's problems, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and everybody's problems. Learn to speak to your adversaries, adversaries if you want to call them, but people from the other side.
Yes.
Explain well, and some people are doing that very well.
Yes.
There, Pops is also interesting in what he speaks about. I don't know if I can express this properly, but he speaks about how the extremes are kind of are similar in a way,
Yeah.
and they're firing up each other,
Yes.
um, and causing this polarization. And so when you find politicians who can speak to the electorate in a way that unites and that encourages toleration and actually moving forward. What worries me a lot is people feel that there's this deadlock and that all politicians are bad
Yeah.
and what does it matter? Nothing is working. These are all the conditions for, and we see it today with Trump, the strongman kind of politics. People
Yes.
say, I'll put a businessman at the head of the country and he'll just get things done.
Yeah.
And I think that's so dangerous when I hear people speak like that. We
Yes.
can't also demonize our politicians, but they have to lead properly and possibly differently. I think Democrats have just done a terrible job recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should watch out for Abigail Spanberger. I'm sure she seems very interesting. I'm going to finish up, Helena. I'm going to finish up by alerting you to the existence. Maybe you've already read this, but I thought I would. This is something I'm doing at the end of these meetings with authors. Is recommending a book.
Excellent.
I hope you've probably already read it, but I think it's a book called Republicanism: An Introduction by Rachel Hammersley, who's a professor of
I
intellectual
haven't
history
read the book, but
at.
I'm familiar with Rachel Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, and the reason I sort of mention this is because I think it's a wonderful companion book to your book, because of just how these two ideas of liberalism and republicanism. I feel that we need to get excited about politics, and I think that what we can get excited about is our liberalism and republicanism. I think they're the two of the most fascinating ideas. Um, as I mentioned, I think earlier on, Hammersley begins in ancient Rome just as you do, but then there's a lot more to say before she gets to the 19th century. She goes to the Renaissance and Machiavelli. She goes to the turns to the English Civil War in the middle of the 17th century, when of course England has its republic for a short period of time. And my dream is actually to teach a course about liberalism and republicanism and use your two books as the basic the readings. But I strongly recommend it. I think it's a really
Terrific. I
book.
will
And
I
I
will
just,
definitely
as you
read this.
also suggested, that there needs to be some kind of dialogue, and we need to really get to grips with the connections between republicanism and liberalism, don't we?
Yeah, we often hear, and historians are a little guilty of this for sure, of this idea that liberalism stands for self-interest, republicanism for virtue.
Yeah,
It's that's just not historically accurate.
certainly. I think you've certainly made that case. But when last question then. So when John JFK said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," was that a liberal or a Republican sentiment?
I'll say it was liberal.
Great.
I'll say it was liberal. It was beautiful. You see, I don't think that we should abdicate patriotism to conservatism. I believe very much that there's a very good and healthy patriotism. And I think that was an expression of that kind of patriotism that I think we should encourage. And listen, I'm saying that as a Swede. I love America. This is a principle that would is valid in every country, but I think perhaps America being a leader in the world, or at least was at one point,
Yeah.
could be an example there. A good patriotism.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this subject, and I hope some of our viewers will order a copy of your wonderful book. the Lost History of Liberalism. Thanks for joining us today, Helena.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for listening. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values, a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear.